So today we are going to jump over to chapter 6. What is in this arrangement of the Gongchik chapter 6? So chapter 6 is the chapter, the collection of Vajra statements on the topic of view, practice, and conduct. View, practice, and conduct. So I want you to, I think, let's see. If you have the book, at the very beginning in the table of contents, and there you can look at very quickly. You can look at the table of contents, and you can look at the chapter arrangement. The 7 plus 1, so altogether 8, but you could say 7 plus 1 in terms of the chapters, which is 7 chapters plus a supplementary chapter, supplementary statements. So if you look at, and I just sent to WhatsApp, just this one page, a picture of the table of contents. Right now, the way we have the arrangement of the Gongchik is chapter 1 of Vajra statements pertaining to the turnings of the Dharma wheel. Then statements on the subject of dependent origination. Then statements on the Vinaya Pratimoksha, statements on the training of the Bodhisattvas, and statements on the observance of mantra awareness holders. These three, chapter 3, 4, 5, are basically what's often, or the topic of 3, 4, 5. These are often called the 3 vows, Domsum in Tibetan, the 3 vows. The 3 vows are not like, vow number 1, not vow number 2, number 3, as in, I vow to do this or I vow not to do that. But the 3 vows is 3 sets of vows. So the first set is called the Vinaya Pratimoksha. Pratimoksha means individual liberation. Prati is individual, moksha is liberation. So Vinaya means to tame the mind. So Vinaya Pratimoksha, then the training of the Bodhisattvas, then the observance of mantra awareness holders. Then chapter 6 is the chapter called View, Practice, and Conduct. Chapter 7 are statements on the fruit that is Buddhahood. So these are the 7 chapters in this arrangement of the Gongchik. As I pointed out that we know that in some of the earliest commentaries of Gongchik, these chapter arrangement, there is an alternative arrangement whereby what is here chapter 6 is chapter 1. What is here chapter 6 is chapter 1. So you could say that the main focus of statements in chapter 1 deals more with, you can say, the philosophical, the theoretical aspects. Whereas chapter 6, the view, practice, and conduct, is focused more on the implementation part, an overview of the implementation part by referring to the view one needs to have, the types of practices one needs to have, and how does one conduct oneself based on this. So chapter 6 pertains more to the implementation, the practice side, and then the statements in chapter 1 deals more with the understanding or the philosophy behind this. So if we now, let's go to chapter 6. We have already looked at chapter 6, statement 1, right? So chapter 6, statement 1, if you remember, if you look at page, that first statement, it says that Gyoba Rinpoche taught that the Dharma that is transmitted by a lineage is profound and marvelous. And this is in response to the attitude, the belief by many people, that the types of dharmas that kind of miraculously appear out of nowhere, it's more profound, more amazing. In response to that, Gyoba Rinpoche says, no, the dharma that comes to us from a lineage is truly profound and marvelous. And there I feel, if we read 6.1 and 1.1 side by side, it's very helpful. Because 1.1, in a way, among the few things that chapter 1, statement 1, among the few things, a few points that are discussed there, in the context of reading 6.1, 1.1 is sort of talking about how universal the Buddha's teaching is. How universal, how even transcending the Buddha. The Dharma even transcends the Buddha, meaning whether Buddhas appear or not, whether Buddhas are around to teach or not, what the Dharma teaches, what the Dharma reveals, is independent of whether there are Buddhas to teach that or not, because it's the fundamental nature of all things. What the Dharma reveals, what the Dharma leads us to see, is the fundamental nature of all things, and therefore, with or without Buddhas being around, that Dharma transcends time and space. So statement 1.1 in part is emphasizing the universal aspect of the reality, the universal aspect of Dharma. Statement 6.1 is emphasizing. So after reading 1.1, when you read 6.1, then what 6.1 says is that, yes, even though, understanding that the Dharma transcends, Buddhas transcend teachers, whether teachers are present or not, teachers are available or not, Buddhas are present or not, Buddhas available or not, the reality that the Dharma points to transcends all of this. Nonetheless, 6.1 tells us, insofar as us insofar as us taking the Dharma into our own experience, putting that into practice, and at first, gaining understanding of it and all of that, then on the practical side of things, that Dharma needs to come to us from a lineage. So in a way, it addresses the potential kind of unintended side effect of 1.1, which is, you might think that it is so universal. Then you might kind of go in the direction of like, oh, then anything that just turns up, especially things that turns up miraculously, magically, oh, that is Dharma, oh, that must be wonderful. Here it says, no, actually, even though Dharma is universal, transcends teachers, transcends even Buddhas, as far as us digesting it, us knowing what to do with it, then it's important that we receive the Dharma from within the context of a lineage. Now, of course, this is with the assumption, or with the caveat that this lineage is not like perverted, that this lineage, does carry forth, carry on kind of the life essence, the experiential essence of these teachings. And that's an important caveat, otherwise, if we think lineage is something else, or we emphasize some other aspects of lineage and consider that to be important, then we don't actually receive the Dharma from within the context of lineage. And I think from the context of lineage here is really the context of that the experiential core, right, of these teachings is unbroken, and it's available to us, and it can come down to us in a way that keeps these teachings warm, not just like lifeless words printed on lifeless sheets of paper, but that they are pulsing with life. That's why in some other expression, like the teaching we just heard, it's called the life force of the Dakinis. So like it's like the heartbeat of the Dakinis is still alive poetically. And so lineage in that sense. So he taught, Khyentse Rinpoche taught that the Dharma that is transmitted by a lineage is profound and marvelous. Now 6.2. 6.2, admittedly, I can tell you, the statement for 6.2, it seems it's not directly connected to 6.1. Again, don't be surprised, because these are, Vajra statements. This is not an extended essay written by Khyentse Rinpoche to systematically present the system. So 6.2, it says, all phenomena included in samsara and nirvana are one's mind. All phenomena, all experience, whether we consider that experience, and whether that experience is samsaric in nature or nirvanic in nature, so to say, they are nothing but one's mind. This is the statement. And so what is it counteracting? It is counteracting the claim by some people that the manifold appearances are unconnected with the inner mind. Manifold appearances. Appearances is a Buddhist technical term. So whenever you see appearances in these Buddhist texts, you should know that they're not just talking about visual appearances. And they're talking about visual, oral, right, sonic, all the senses, all the sense experiences. All sense experiences are called appearances. So here it's saying that the statement is to counteract this view that the experiences that we have, right, are not connected to the inner mind. Now, in the notes that Sobish provides, Sobish tells us that this view, that appearances are unconnected to the mind, is not necessarily a position that is systematically or philosophically held by any Buddhist in a formal way in Tibet. While there were Indian Buddhist schools or Buddhist communities in India historically that might hold a position like this, insofar as Tibet, there are no organized philosophies of that sort, organized Buddhist philosophies of that sort in Tibet. So what Khyentse Rinpoche here is addressing is not so much that there's actually groups of Buddhists around his time that went around saying, oh, what you experience is, is somehow the way it is out there and unconnected to the perceiving mind. So to be clear, right, this is not, unlike the other statements that could be addressing certain groups teaching or believing certain things that in Kyoba Rinpoche's view is off, is inaccurate, or even wrong. In this case, probably not referring to any specific groups. Nonetheless, it's a pervasive mistake that we all make. It's a pervasive mistake that we all make, which is we think, happiness and suffering somehow exist independently, objectively out there. That what we need to do is to simply go find this objective happiness and run away from this objective, externally truly existing suffering that is out there. So this statement, in some ways, then, is hitting at something even more basic, that we all have this error, that we habitually, right? We habitually and stubbornly actually behave and feel that our experiences have a level of reality that has nothing to do with how we are perceiving them. And that, Kyoba Rinpoche say, is a wrong view. We have to see how what we experience, even just in that phrase I just used, what we experience is what we experience. So if you don't want suffering, don't experience suffering. If you want happiness, then experience happiness. Then when it comes to that, we have to train the mind. Not train, what we think is out there. What we think is out there, maybe some degree of massaging, rearranging, improving. Maybe some degree of that is necessary. I can agree to that, like if you're in a room that is really cold, if it is possible, you raise the temperature, the heat, if you have a heating system, or you put on more clothing. Yes. Okay, fair, I think. But if you really think about the disproportionate degree that we emphasize on fixing, correcting, improving, massaging, manipulating outside things in order to make inside mind happy, satisfied, free, blissful, then we can see how ridiculous it has been for the most part. Right? Like some of us have great interest, like myself, in cooking, diligently, right? From the procuring of the ingredients to when that thing is finally cooked. You can spend a few hours doing it. And then you're like, this is so satisfying, right? Now, what's really going on there is it the mind that is satisfied? Or is it the body that is satisfied? So sometimes, after spending 4 hours, right? If you enjoy cooking, after spending 4 hours from buying the stuff to finally cooking the stuff and bringing it to the table, and whoever that you thought to include for that thing that you have cooked, comes to the table, takes one taste and say, yeah. Immediately, right? Your whole satisfaction flies out the window. Even if the moment before this person especially your child, comes, takes one spoonful, yeah, right, immediately. But the moment right before that, you are so satisfied. So you see, it's not really in the taste, it's in the mind. So what we experience is what we experience. Even in just saying that. But so often we forget what we experience is based on what we experience. 529. So Chodra, quotes a few sources, but 529. Therefore, if you understand through this meaning that appearances are your mind itself, a cause that makes you attain Buddhahood, a capable seed, namely bodhicitta, arises, which is unbiased toward friend or foe, since Lord Maitreya said in the Uttara Tantra that having seen that myself and all beings are the same. So the mind, the mind. So here, when it says that, so there's a phrase, called everything is only mind. Everything is simply mind, right? That statement is not to be understood. That statement is not to be understood as a physical statement or a scientific statement. It is not proposing that the table, the chair, the sofa, the house is somehow just a product of mind. But what it is saying is your experience of what you label as sofa, table, chair, house, tea, computer, Buddha statue, those are your labels, and those are what you are experiencing. So everything is nothing but mind means that, which is all the things that we think we experience, and therefore based on our experience, we think objectively exist out there. They are not as objectively out there as we habitually and foolishly and misguidedly think they are. In fact, we only experience what our particular biases, our particular karmic constitution, our particular limitations allows us to experience. So one famous Tibetan intellectual, modern period, Gendun Chupel, very famous in Tibetan society because he is one of the first few people in modern Tibet to be aware of like the outside world. And then he traveled outside. He went to India. He went to Sri Lanka. And he became quite radical in his thinking. But he's also committed to Buddhism, but then he stopped being a monk. And so, he was criticized for that. But in part also, he saw the hypocrisy of the system in Tibet. And he tried to change, to bring in what he learned from India, from Sri Lanka. But in the end, of course, it was too late in a way. Tibet was under the threat from the communist Chinese and this and that. And then in the end, Gendun Chupel died in Tibet released from prison, but I think he contracted like tuberculosis or something like that, and he died fairly young, but a brilliant Tibetan mind. So in a very famous essay, extended essay he wrote, which is called Ludrup Gongyen, ornament of Nagarjuna's gong, Nagarjuna's intention, the same word with single intention, ornament of Nagarjuna's intentions, or Nagarjuna's thought, Nagarjuna's mind. He wrote so basically about like Madhyamaka topic, because he was trained in the Gelugpa system. Although his family background was Nyingma, he was formally trained as a Gelugpa scholar monk. And then, of course, he went to India, as I said, went to Sri Lanka. Then eventually he stopped being a monk. He came back. So he said something like this. He said, that we see the world and experience the world the way we experience it is so dependent on, this, in this case, he says, the fact that our two eyes, right, are laid out horizontally on our face, he says. So he says the reality that we call reality, that we perceive, it only looks like that because, have you considered, he said, because our eyes are laid out on our face, on landscape, right? He says, what if you woke up one day and your eyes are stacked one on top of the other, meaning portrait? Eye is like this. He said, and then what, right? What would the world look like? Completely different. So he says that's only one sense. What about the sense of smell? What about the sense of taste? What about the sense of sound, hearing? If all those were configured differently, what happened to the reality we were so committed to when we have our eyes horizontally laid out, our ear, one here and one here? What if ears, one here and one back there? What would the world sound like? Completely different. Then he said, and we say that the world is this way, this way, this way, this way, based on consensus. Like, because, well, today, about 7 billion people, more or less, experience the world this way, right? He says, but anybody ask the ants? There are way more ants than humans. So if by consensus, then you have to let the ants win. There's a lot more of them than us. Then we have to run the world according to them. So this is the same point as is made here in Gongchik, that what we are able to experience as reality, pain, pleasure, problems, opportunities, never forget that they only appear to be so because of our own perception, our own minds. And our perception arises from our karmic makeup. Comments, questions? Say something.
Yes, Dr. Lai.
Yes.
Good morning. So what he's promoting, it's a mix of Mayamaka and Yogacharya, both views together. I mean, to try to put it on what you think, but I know.
Perhaps, perhaps. Yeah, it's hard to say.
You think it's hard to say?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
Generally, yes, I say yes. But then, when you start studying those things, the tenet systems, drupta, then superficially we say drupta, right? For those of you who know about these things, if you don't know, don't worry, okay? This is, remember, our tour bus keeps moving, okay? Some sites you're going to catch, some sites you're not going to catch, but don't get stuck, okay? But for those who know, let's talk a little bit about this. Generally, that in the study of the tenet systems, meaning a systematic study about, which is developed in late Indian Buddhism, primarily the Nalanda tradition, summarizes the entire history of Indian philosophy, Indian Buddhist philosophical positions. They kind of generally summarize, and you could say then overly summarize into four, they say, four general schools. It begins with Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka. It says that generally in late Indian Buddhism. But the reality on the ground of Indian Buddhist history is that there were way more differences than these four. But late Indian Buddhism, in Nalanda, they say everything can be subsumed into these four. So then this particular way of looking at things got brought to Tibet. Then Tibetans got very invested in figuring out these four. Then, of course, when they give these four, there is a certain hierarchy, which is Sautrantika is the most kind of fun, most like rudimentary position, to be improved by Vaibhashika, to be further improved by Chittamatra, to be completely improved by the Madhyamaka. And then within Madhyamaka, again, division into categories, and further division and further division, okay? So I'll give myself as an example. You know, when I first started studying this, you know, at first it was a headache. It's like, oh God. Then it became a very enjoyable addiction. Then, you know, it became like, oh, there were these four positions, and then you study and you got the ins and the outs, you know, the four positions. Then you think that, you know, whenever people talk about these four, they're talking about these four. Then later, you know, when you study even more, you're like, wait. The way the Gelugpas talk about Sautrantika is not necessarily the way the Nyingmas talk about Sautrantika. So as it turns out, everyone kind of, when you get down to the level where it gets interesting, they define, you know, what a Sautrantika is, and what a Vaibhashika is, and what a Chittamatrin is, and what a Madhyamakan is, differently. Then suddenly, at least for me, I realized, wait, they're talking about different things. They're talking past each other. Not only that, even within Gelugpa, as one of the great Gelugpa scholars in the West, Jeffrey Hopkins, will say, he said, don't ever make this statement, Gelugpa ... He's like, there's no Gelugpa ... He says, that's just too imprecise, because you have to say, Gomang, which is one college within one monastery. He says, the Gomang people will speak of it in this way. And then, you know, the Sera J people will speak of it in that way. And depending on what textbooks they use, right? The clear definition of the difference between this and that changes. So then in the end, it becomes a study in all the different definitions that different writers and thinkers have assigned to different terms. That is why I say, hard to say if this view is a combination of Chittamatra and Madhyamaka. But generally, you can say yes. Actually, some of the Vajra statements, when we go back to chapter 1, Kyopa Rinpoche is going to say certain things that is kind of like, whoa, especially if you come from the background of studying these tenet systems. Because he says, you know, here, I can fast forward to that we're going to come back to that statement later. It says, let's see, statement 113 or no, 12. Oh, 111, the next one, after we are done in chapter 6, a few more statements. It says, the Buddha's instructions that teach mind only, Chitta Matra, reveal the Madhyamaka. So how he's going to use the term Chitta Matra and Madhyamaka, I will say, it's going to be different how other people uses those terms. So in this Vajra statement, he says, the Buddha's instructions that teach Chitta Matra reveal the Madhyamaka. Again, general tenet system says Chitta Matra is down here, Madhyamaka is up here. In that Vajra statement, it says, actually, the Chitta Matra teachings, they teach Madhyamaka. What that means, we can look at it later.
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
I have a question.
Thank you.
From the last sessions, I've come to have the concept that the mind does not exist as a physical thing the way we normally think of objects. On the other hand, subjectively, we all experience our mind. So it's both real, physical, it's both real and unreal, or unsubstantial at the same time.
Yes.
So neither real nor unreal applies
Yes.
to the mind.
Yes.
So I've also heard the analogy that mind is analogous to space.
Yes.
Because it is unlimited. It has no limits.
Yeah, there is one reason. And then in the Ganga Mahamudra, Tilopa basically taught the Naropa 6 ways in which the metaphor of space corresponds with the qualities of mind.
Mind.
Yeah.
And neither space nor mind have attributes like we would normally ascribe to objects.
Yes.
No size, no color,
yes.
no weight,
no center,
no,
no periphery, no up, no down, no here, no there.
Up, no down. Yes.
Yeah. But nonetheless, it's the basis for ascribing up, down, here, there, big, small.
Right. Then all the appearances that we see or perceive, they're occurring in space. They're appearing and disappearing.
Yes.
They're impermanent.
Yes.
So they're not forever.
Yes.
They come and they go.
Yes.
And our thoughts, our emotions,
yes,
occurring in the mind are the same. They come, they go. They're not permanent.
And when we say occurring in the mind,
well, they are occurring.
It's only a matter of speech, okay? It's not like there is a mind for them to occur in.
Right, because the mind has no substantial reality.
Yes, right.
Appearances, which are occurring in one unsubstantial thing, which is our mind. Yes. And we conceive of them as happening in the external world.
Yes.
Okay. Both concepts are flawed because the mind is of the same nature as everything else.
Yes.
Okay. What I have trouble understanding or even having a concept is how does the idea of ethics and correct behavior work into this concept of reality?
Very easy. The Zen way is to, if I was in the same room as you, to slap you in the face.
Okay. That's neither good nor
that
bad.
will put a stop to like any kind of like, well, does it matter, that in this emptiness, everything is temporary. Well, if you don't mind temporarily being smacked, then no problem. But the problem is we do mind that we don't want to be smacked. So the Zen way has a certain immediacy, without using logic, without using arguments, just slap you in the face and say, what about that?
That.
Yeah, so we can go in the Nalanda tradition of showing, and there is a way to show emptiness on the one side and how it plays out, right? The language that we're using here. Shikineluk, Babkineluk. Shikineluk is the fundamental nature from the perspective of essence, empty. The fundamental nature from the aspect of how it plays out, incontrovertible cause and effect, which is where the realm of ethics is. These two do not contradict, right? So more in the style of the Nalanda, scholastic tradition, you can lay it out very clearly, right? Then you have the Zen and the Mahasiddha tradition, where in a very direct way, it just cuts it across to you. Now, they also say, for people to really kind of like get it from this more direct style, you need a lot of merit, you need a lot of devotion. Lacking merit and devotion, when something like that happens, these days, you take that Lama to court.
Right.
Cannot even appreciate, the directness of what just happened.
Thank you.
Yeah, one story. So I'll use the Zen tradition. One story. So the master was teaching about emptiness, in giving a short lecture about emptiness. So the students, thought they understood. So one day, at the end of this teaching, the master said to one of the students, "Now show me your understanding of emptiness." So then the disciple predictably did this, right? Especially the analogy of space, right? And he goes, which on some level it's good, right? It's like, well, you want me to show you emptiness? Here. It can and it cannot be shown, right? So disciple gave a pretty good answer when the master said, now, who in the assembly can show me emptiness? So one disciple got up, stood in front of the teacher. So this is called Dharma combat. This is their style of debate. And everyone thought, oh, that's pretty good, right? So it's pretty profound in the sense that the disciple is not saying this is emptiness, but more like, well, if you want me to show here, well, am I showing you anything? No. But is it nothing? No, right? So the disciple did this. Master said, wrong. Then disciple challenged master. Now you show me then, emptiness. So master grabbed the disciple's nose, drag him across the room, and he was yelling and screaming, like painful, drag him across the room by the nose at the other end of the room, and he goes, the master goes, and master goes, that is emptiness. The way it plays out on the level of having experiences, on the level of still relating to labels. there is an incontrovertible working. If someone grabs your nose, pulls you across the room, there is an experience going on. That experience itself, though illusory, still produces results. Results that, as long as we are still connected to labels, we have to experience. Sobish, his notes, page 530, or at least on the print version, is 530. It says this, okay? I'm going to read. Taking chiefly the perspective of practice or of soteriology rather than ontology. Okay, these are two big words in English, in philosophy. Soteriology meaning like sort of like the science or the knowledge of liberation, salvation. It's a Christian term, soteriology, the science or the knowledge of salvation. How do you become saved? In our case, how do you become liberated? Rather than ontology, ontology is the science of the knowledge about like the ground of things. So here it's saying, taking the perspective of soteriology, meaning the statements are not to be interpreted as whether things really are out there or not. That's a secondary concern. Yeah? So taking chiefly the perspective of practice, our commentaries are not so much interested in a philosophical refutation of external objects, although, of course, they do deny their existence as independently real. But to attain liberation, the belief that appearance is independent of the mind must be refuted. For the purposes, right, of attaining liberation, then the belief that appearance is independent of the mind must be refuted. Can you understand that line?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. Likewise, I would say, let me change this statement. But to build, right, an airplane, the belief that appearance is mind must be refuted. Can you understand my statement?
Say that again, please.
But to build an aeroplane, the belief that appearance is mind must be refuted.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yes. So imagine, right? Just kind of imagine this imaginary world where everyone instinctively understand that appearances is mind. And now they have signed up at Boeing, right? That they're going to be engineers of planes, right? The guru at that school need to refute that appearances are mind so that the students can focus on building an aeroplane that will actually fly. But here, okay, coming back to here, but for attaining liberation, the belief that appearance is independent of the mind must be refuted. The commentaries are concerned with establishing the connection of appearance and mind as a vital point of view, practice, and conduct. Thus, Jigten Sumgun maintains that all phenomena included in samsara and nirvana are one's mind. Rinchen Changchup states, there is nothing in the teaching of the completely perfect Buddha that is not contained in this single sentence. It contains the 150 Vajra statements of the single of Gongchik, and since this point is the essence, it is very profound. Both Rinjangma and Dorshema provide a list of 6 reasons for why this statement is so important. But all of this is from the perspective of Mahamudra practice. Likewise, hypothetically, from the perspective of building an aeroplane, then this is not profound. In fact, this is dangerous. But from the perspective of achieving liberation from samsara, by engaging in Mahamudra practice, this point is profound for the following 6 reasons. Sentient beings transmigrate due to desire and hatred. But if they understand that appearances are only the mind, the objects of desire and hatred vanish. Since this is conducive to freedom, it is profound. This view is profound. People perceive other beings in terms of friend and foe, like or don't like. Benefit to me, harm to me, right? The thought that grasps this duality of friend and foe is bias. And bias is a state of mind that disrupts the cultivation of the resolve for awakening for the benefit of all. However, when one understands that appearances are only the mind, then the capable seed of attaining Buddhahood, namely the resolve for awakening, namely relative bodhicitta, pervades all sentient beings without a bias of friend and foe. Pervades as in, not that they exist in sentient beings. In this case, it means you regard, you cover all sentient beings without the bias of friend and foe. Since this view is therefore conducive to the cultivation of resolve, of relative bodhicitta, it is profound. If one understands that appearances are only the mind, one understands mantra practice. And here we're not talking about chanting mantra, mumbling. It's talking about Vajrayana. So if one understands that appearances are only the mind, one understands mantra practice, which is the accomplishing of this very body as the Buddha body without removing or adding something impure or pure. Since this approaches the principle of Vajrayana practice, it is profound. All the supreme and common siddhis arise from devotion to the authentic Guru. This devotion must be one that realizes the creator of everything, i.e., the pure deeds of a Buddha, or even any pleasurable thing, to be none other than the Guru. The creator as in the source. Such devotion arises from understanding appearances to be only the mind. And so this 4th statement, right, is key in understanding why devotion to the Guru. And devotion to the Guru cannot be independent from the understanding that all appearances are only mind. 5. To cross the ocean of samsaric suffering, one needs to realize samsara itself as nirvana, which is Mahamudra free from eliminating and obtaining. Since such a realization arises from understanding that all appearances are only mind, it is profound. This is similar to the 2nd point, which focuses on sentient beings and applies non-duality to friend and foe. So here it applies non-duality to samsara and nirvana. If friend and foe is like the more personal and more limited division, Then ultimate division is samsara, nirvana. Finally, understanding that all appearances are only the mind, the most minute cause, such as offering but a single flower, is understood to be equal to the sphere of reality, the sphere of beings, and the deeds of all the Buddhas of the three times. Through such a realization, any root of virtue that one generates is wholly dedicated to awakening. Since this is like the conduct of Samantabhadra, it is profound. Samantabhadra here refers to the Bodhisattva, not the Nyingma primordial Buddha, but to the Samantabhadra's aspiration prayer. And so here it shows, like if you understand, that all appearances are mind, then even something as simple, quote unquote, insignificant, quote unquote, as offering one flower to the Buddhas, that virtue can pervade all space and time, because mind is everything. So Sobish continues to quote from Rinjangma and Dorshema. Mind includes not only, quote, all the happiness of the higher pleasant transmigrations and all the suffering of the three bad transmigrations, meaning the six realms, but also, quote, the awakening of the lower path, the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddha's peace and nirvana, the path of Mahamudra, non-abiding nirvana, the bodhisattvas, the ultimate result, the Buddha's bodies and gnosis, and all his teachings, qualities, deeds, and activities. All this, apart from being appearances of one's mind, is not externally established in the Rinjangma. Everything that is imagined in any form about samsara and nirvana and thereby appears is only one's mind. Any indulging in signs of or holding on to existence and non-existence, pure, impure, luminosity, emptiness. So these are all the pairs that we have been working with, right? The original fundamental nature of all phenomena, absolute truth, and great perfection too, is only one's mind, because it is mentally fabricated and held by an apprehending mode. This, quote, being only an appearance of one's mind, of all these things and occurrences, is like a dream. So the Rinjangma says, for instance, in a dream, all those various good and bad, high and low, pleasurable and painful appearances are, if analyzed by one who is awake, if considered by one who is awake, is seen as nothing but the confusion of one's mind. Concerning the dream objects, meaning what's dreamed of, what appears in dreams, it is understood through one's own experience when one wakes up that there is nothing out there in that dream, established externally. Similarly, the various appearances present in the waking state too, except insofar as they are the appearance of the mind of the individual perceiver of these things, they too are not externally established, even to the extent of 100th slice of the tip of a hair. Now, the notes given here are really good, because he got it from the Rinjangma and Dorshema explaining this point. Chodra did not spend a lot of time explaining this point. So our commentary here, translated here, did not explain this point in such details. But these points are given in the Dorshema and Rinjangma, the two earliest commentaries on Gongchik. So it's really important we pay attention to the notes for this particular point. So here, the question of like, if, appearances are mind, right? Then why do they appear, or how do they appear to be out there? Rinzhen Chengzhi provides the following example. The cause is the existence of a seed of habitual traces of hatred within oneself. And the condition is the external appearance of the bloody red hand that killed your father. So he gave a very strong example, you know. The cause is that there are habitual traces of hatred within you. And then the condition is the external appearance of a bloody red hand that killed your father. Based on such causes and conditions, hatred arises, and to the extent that the external object appears, one perceives the harm it inflicted. But the mere object that appears is not suddenly inflicting harm. It is only one's mind that appears like that. Conversely, when one cultivates loving kindness, to the extent that objects appears, it becomes an experience of happiness. He sums it up, quote, "It is not the object that changes, it is one's mind. Therefore, there is no back and forth in the external object. It is the back and forth of one's mind." The object doesn't change, but we habitually change. We label friend and foe, back and forth. But in fact, you know, the object doesn't change. It's the mind. So this, you know, to me, very nicely, it says, it is not the object that changes, it is one's mind. Therefore, there is no back and forth in the external object. It is the back and forth of one's mind. This is comparable to a very famous encounter of this sort, reported in the Zen tradition, in the very important text in the Zen tradition called the Platform Sutra, a platform like mandala, the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. It is said that one day the Sixth Patriarch overheard a conversation between two monks. And these two monks, they were looking at a flag fluttering in the wind. A flag is being blown about in the wind. So these two monks are debating, is the flag moving or is the wind moving? Obviously not an ordinary conversation. They're talking about, is the flag moving or is the wind moving? Which is moving? Then some of us might be tempted to say, well, both are moving. Because the flag has a material quality that can be moved in this way. And because wind is moving, therefore it moves. And therefore the flagpole is not really moving, even though the wind is moving. So we might say that, right? So in that sense, we are concerned about the status of the external object. We are concerned with what we could be called ontology. Instead, the Sixth Patriarch comes when he hears these two monks debating this way, and the two monks ask the Sixth Patriarch, "Master, what do you think?" He says, "The mind." He says, "The mind is moving, not the wind, not the flag." In a way, is he saying it's not that the flag is not moving or the wind is not moving, but more important for you, insofar as the question of whether you are going to live bound, in bondage, or freed from afflictive emotions, more important than determining, is it the wind moving? Is it the cloth moving? Is to see how it's the mind that is moving. So the Rinjangma once more summarizes the same point through these words of Pamudrupa. These words by Pamudrupa. He says, sometimes this valley of Ngamshu, Ngamshu is where Pamudrupa, the Jigten Sumgön's teacher, lived. Sometimes this valley of Ngamshu is a ground of burning iron. That's the description of the hell realms. And sometimes this valley of Ngamshu is the palace, is the place of Akanishta, where Vajradhara is said to reside. And sometimes this is the pure land of Vajradhara, sometimes this is the hell realms. That's where we are. Right where we are standing, right where we are sitting, sometimes is a ground of burning iron, sometimes is the place of Akanishta. Can we see that? Can we remember that? Or at least for now, can we have trust that this is how it is? If we can have a little bit of trust that this is how it is, then not blind faith, then based on that trust, we will learn to perceive it more and more clearly, that in fact, there is no back and forth in external objects. Or you don't need to spend so much time working on the back and forth that occurs with external objects. Work on the back and forth that is occurring to the perceiving mind. Then when you apply this to the question of the guru, in Dorshema 6.5, it says, depending on one's supreme, medium, or lower merit, the guru too will be good, medium, or bad. And thus, if one perceives a guru who is lacking in qualities, in characteristics, that is an appearance caused by one's own inferior roots of virtue. Your guru is only as good as your own qualities. So as I said, while many saw Buddha Shakyamuni and recognized him to be Buddha, and therefore teacher, supreme teacher, there were even more Indians during his time that only saw him as a beggar and cult leader. And so there was no Buddha. There was no awakened ones as far as those people were concerned, because they have no merit to see the Buddha. Thus, if internally the thoughts are pure due to one's merit, appearances arise as great bliss. However, as long as one's mind is impure, one forms a negative idea of outer appearances. If that is the case, there is, quote, no benefit in fleeing from appearances, unquote, since they are not real. Instead, one should focus on the mind. And now quoting Rinjangma, it is, for instance, as if one whose face is stained looks into a pure mirror. He grasps the spot on his face in the non-cognizing mirror as being black. And so he sees in the mirror and he sees the black stain, and then he points right on that mirror. Ooh, he grasps. Oh, that's dirty. That is not the fault of the mirror. It is the fault of the stain of one's face. Knowing that one's face is stained, one washes the face well, and having purified it, one does not see a stain when one looks in the mirror. It is very important to understand the meaning through this example and purify one's mental continuum. Instead, what we do is we see in the mirror the stain, then we start polishing the mirror. and try to remove the stain. The next section is the fivefold path, what we were talking about, that earlier teaching I shared. But at the bottom, it says, Dorje Sherab quotes Jigten Sumgun as saying this. This is a very famous quote. If you do not understand that whatever pleasure and pain arise appears as your own mind, is your own mind, you remain an outsider to this teaching. That means you remain an outsider to what Buddha taught. You're not a follower of the Buddha Dharma. If you do not understand that whatever pleasure and pain arise appears as your own mind, you remain an outsider to this teaching. If you wish to secure benefit and happiness, strive to purify your own mind. (535). I strongly encourage that you read it. 535, the last paragraph. Sobish addresses the question of mind only. Concerning the recent academic debate on whether the Yogacara maintains an absolute or subjective idealism, I believe that to apply such purely philosophical terms would do an injustice to the Gongchik. It is perhaps best to understand this type of mind only in its own terms. In brief, this type of Yogacara or Chittamatra seems to be part of a soteriological program, a program of salvation, a practice program that has cognitive misorientation and thereby duality and suffering as the starting point. The two levels of mind only and no mind as the path, duality and thereby liberation as the goal. The argument for a mind-only view in the present does not seem to be so much an argumentum ad ignorantium, meaning no outer objects because there's no evidence for them. There is not so much that argument, but rather that there is evidence that whatever is perceived as an outer object, as it appears, entirely is, as it appears, entirely dependent on the mind and its karmic structure.
That I wanted to ask a question about the difference between the mind only and this. And so this is saying mind only says there's nothing out there at all. And
well,
this that
there are academic debates based on these tenet system studies, you know. So the tenet system studies, right? In a way, they kind of misrepresent the other. So they will say, oh, you know, these mind-only people, they say that so everything is not real because it's mind-only, but they say the mind is real. And therefore, you need the Madhyamaka, which shows that even the mind is not real. Here, what then these debates of mind only add to modern, you add the Western side of things, which is this Western philosophical position called idealism. And in the study of idealism in the Western canon, not Buddhist, Western, right? Idealism as a philosophical position says, you cannot say that they are outer objects because there is no evidence for them. Now, whether you agree with that or not, beside the point. But that's how they argue. So they say, therefore, everything is just imaginary. What Sobish is saying here is that for Kyoba Rinpoche, for the Gongchik tradition, we say that everything is mind only, not so much concerned with whether there is or there isn't things out there, but more concerned with whatever heck it is that you think that it is out there, what is it that makes that decision? What is it? Judy?
I'm sorry, something's going on out here. Would you, I think I see it. It's whether it's out there or not is not the question. It's what we perceive it to be is based on our mind.
And our mind is influenced by?
Confusion and
our karma, the karmic patterns,
yeah,
the karmic structure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So he's clarifying, he's clarifying both the problems of applying the study of tenet system, which is an old, venerable Buddhist scholastic tradition, right? He's pointing out how if you try to impose those categories onto what's going on here, right, you're going to think, oh, these guys are so unsophisticated in the way they think about these things. Then secondly, Sobish wants to say, and then if you then think, oh, this statement superficially sounds like what in Western philosophy is talking about idealism, he says, no, you are also mistaken, because in the Western idealism, right, they are more interested in whether stuff is really out there or not. It's like an intellectual exercise. This is also not Kyoba Rinpoche's interest. His interest really is, it's beside the point, whether that camera out there is really out there or not. More important is, do you see that the mind that perceives what it labels as camera, do you see all the workings of that mind? Do you see all the workings of that perceiver? Insofar as freedom from samsara, that is what we have to resolve. That is what we have to clarify. That is what we have to habituate. This is what this is saying. Good? Yes.
I'm still not clear on the airplane part.
The airplane part?
Yeah, where you say that in order to build the airplane, I have to believe that I'm constructing something that is solid, right? That's what.
Yes. I'm just sort of using an example of saying my point there.
No, anything that I have to build, say a house. Something.
Yeah. No, my point there is simply to say it's context. Right? If the context is to achieve liberation, then certain things needs to be refuted. If the context is to build a house, certain things needs to be refuted. That's all. That's all my point there. Nothing more profound than that point.
Okay.
Well, that is very profound because it's the opposite. It's the opposite which is needed in each case.
Yes, yes, of course.
To build the airplane, if you intend to build the airplane, you have to have a distinction between your mind and external objects.
Yes.
But if you want liberation, you have to prove the opposite.
Yes. Yeah, I would say it's a very important point, you know.
So one day you want to build an airplane and the next day you want to be liberated.
Yeah, then you need to know what to refute. Cecil?
Okay. Hold on. What I understand is that cultivating bodhicitta and compassion is the beginning to change our current karma. Did I understand well?
Sure, yes, you can say that, of course. But then to cultivate bodhicitta, you also need this, you need that, you need this, you need that, many, many things.
Okay.
Yeah. But 2.6.2 is this statement is really, really important, which is basically that here, pay attention to that which is making all these decisions, whether the decision to suffer or the decision to be free, and even the definition of what is suffering and what is free. Pay attention to what is that. We of course give a label to it, even in this text. We call it the mind. But the mind is just a word, you know. Basically, pay attention to that. What is that? How does that work? What are the habit patterns of that right now? Look at that. So when it says to practice this mind, it means that. So the earlier translation I shared when we're doing Guru Puja, which is the second translation that these two young men have been working on. It says, you know, practice this mind. You know, what does it mean? You know, in this case, it's not so much about cultivating, you know, certain qualities of the mind. Here is really looking directly, doing your best to look directly at what is it, you know, who is it that is making all these decisions, perceiving all these things, labeling all these things. So this goes back, like for those of you familiar with Chan or Zen tradition, this is like in the Gong'an tradition, using the meditation on koans. Japanese call it koans, Chinese is Gong'an, right? So one of the most important Gong'an in Chinese and Korean, Japanese they sometimes they use this, sometimes they don't. Is this expression in Mandarin Chinese is called 是什么? 是什么? Which, you know, it's a very common thing. It just simply means, what is it? 是什么? What is this? As in this thing we call mind, you know, what is it? 是什么? So what is this? So this kind of raises this question, you know, and you pay attention, you know, when you say mind, you know, what is this? And then you watch. And that is where shamatha and vipassana is developed on that basis, you know, like a mind that is very focused. Because if you don't pay close attention, then whatever you say the mind is and you think the mind is, all those are just concepts. So why you quiet the mind down is so that you can look at it and see it for what it is. And then in Mahamudra teachings, in Zen, in whatever, you know, they tell you, they have these words, you know, it is this, it is this, it is this, it is this. But at the end of the day, to see that all those are labels. end of the day, when all is said and done, or don't wait until all is said and done, start as soon as you can. Look directly. What is this? What is this mind? Not philosophically, okay? All your categories, all your labels, all that is useless for this kind of practicing the mind. This kind of practicing the mind, if you're really serious about it, well, start letting the mind quiet down. Let the mind be present. Oh, let's not use the word mind. Let your attention settle. Let your attention be present here. That is the first step. When your attention is settled, present, then it can see. What is it going to see? Let's not say too much about it, because then I'm just giving you words and concepts that will color what you're going to see. Good?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's why this is the practice lineage. This is not so much a learning lineage, even though we're learning so much. So this is called Drupgyu, a practice lineage. Another word for Kagyu is Drupgyu. So when things are really going well, then we are practicing. Then when things are not going well, we're just pretending to practice and we're lazy. We're like, oh, no need to study. Oh, study. Oh, that's just, it's just going to give me a headache, Then we say, oh, now I'm just going to practice. But in fact, we just become lazy. And then we're in this zone of like fake, serenity. Like, oh, yes, yeah, everything is mine. Oh, but it's all just fuzziness. But all in the name, like, oh, we are the practice lineage, so I don't want to think. That's also not the solution, That's why the people who are committed to studying and learning, they will make fun for good reason. These so-called meditators, they don't even know what to meditate on. So what are they talking about when they say meditate? When you meditate, you have to meditate on something. And they have not yet understood what to meditate on. How can you meditate? So then studying is also important. But studying cannot become an end unto itself. Studying should always be pointing to what we call practice, what we call experiencing it. So Confucius, he has a saying in the Analects. This is in the Chinese tradition. He says, to think, in this context, is the equivalent of, I guess, our practice. But here he's talking about the relationship between thinking and learning. He says to think without learning is dangerous. And to learn without thinking is wasteful. This is a good guide, I think. To learn without thinking, meaning you accumulate knowledge, information, but you don't think about it. You don't reflect. You don't start to use what you have learned to help you kind of navigate what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what you're relating to around you, then it's wasteful. And so likewise, like here, right? When you study, the Gongchik, one thing I want to say is, because we are talking about subtleties in understanding the Dharma, then not out of like criticizing, not out of pride, not out of putting down anyone, but I think it's really important that at some point you begin to read with an eye. Yeah? You begin to read like what Buddhist teachers teach as Buddha Dharma in a more critical way. Again, not out of arrogance, not out of showing, oh, I know better than this person, but you have to begin to apply that. You have to begin to apply the insights that come from here to see more clearly how there are all these types of fuzzy things, that are swimming around. That we think, oh, that's the Dharma, but in fact, it's off point. So you want to think, to borrow Confucius's way of saying, to learn without thinking about it is wasteful. Then he also says, but to think without learning, that, he says, is dangerous. You have all kinds of ideas of your own, but you're too proud to check with so many things that you don't know. So you don't learn from the sages, he says. You don't learn from the lineage, in other words. You don't learn from those who have really seen this, who have really understood this, and that you just want to think yourself. He says that's actually dangerous. So both learn and think, or in this case, learn, then apply. We use the word practice, but sometimes that we reduce that to just formal practice. It's not just that. Practice is a much broader category. So to learn and then to experience. Yeah. So Chanchu Senchu Rinpoche Ma Ge Ba Nam Ge Gyu Chi Ge Ba Nyam Pa Me Ba Yang Go Ne